In our last podcast, Toby Hadoke and I chatted largely about Doctor Who, and we'll no doubt mention it again. But this time we're chatting mainly about Toby himself and his comedy, everything from his early stand-up to his excellent award-winning comedy writing and performing. Such an amazing talent and one of the nicest guys on the planet. Toby, good morning.
Good morning.
Tell me, who is Toby Hadoke? I'm trying to isolate what you are. I know who you are, and you're a lovely man, and I love talking to you, and I enjoy your company. But who is Toby Hadoke? What is he?
A series of unfortunate accidents. You know what? What was it? Was it Lennon who said, you know, that life is what happens? Was it John Lennon who said, what life is what happens when you're making other plans? Or if I just applied something said by a great philosopher to a musician?
I think you're correct. I think it was John Lennon. But
oh, right. Okay.
If it wasn't, it doesn't matter.
Well, yes, I just don't want to start with a mistake, but there we go. It might be emblematic of everything that follows. My life seems to have sort of worked out in ways that I hadn't sort of planned or anticipated, and yet when you look back, you can see the seeds for it all being sown. I think, you know, my original plan was to be a classical actor, and I've done a bit of that, but I don't like being bored, so I've always done that thing, Peter, where pretty much everything I've ever done I've generated myself, which I slightly resent because I would quite like it if stuff just landed on my doorstep. But I don't like being bored.
No, but it's obvious that you put in a great deal of effort because everything you have touched, you've been hugely successful at. Let's just start with, you are a comedian. That's not your principal work, but you are a comedian. And you're a brilliant one, because I note that you won the original Les Dawson Award. Now, Les Dawson is a hero to any comedian, I would think, and he's certainly one of my favourites. But that's a marvellous achievement. It's a long time ago, Toby, and you're still doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key to that is I started doing stand-up, again, by mistake. When I was at university, a friend of mine was starting a stand-up comedy night, and he said, do you want to have a go? And I went, well, why? I thought, why not? I've never been great at, I've always been better on stage. I've always been more confident behind the facilitation of performance. I'm not going to be so grand as to say when I'm pretending to be somebody else, but I've always been nervous about phoning people up. I've always needed a social lubricant, I think, to flourish in company. So the facilitation of performance. Somebody say, right, your desire to be seen or heard has been allowed by this this construction of whatever we're doing, and stand up was part of that, because I thought, well, I might get better at auditions. I might be able to put on a facade that I've learnt to do in the cut and thrust of stand up when I'm on a one-to-one situation. So that was my motive. But I think, Peter, and I think this is the key, because I had no ambition with stand up, because I never thought I'd be good enough. I saw the comedians at the Comedy Store. I thought, well, I'll never perform at the Comedy Store. And I was fine with that, because I thought, well, I'm not as good at that. So because I was sort of doing it as something to do, and the first gig I did went surprisingly well, but that was because I brought loads of mates. But I found that I enjoyed it as much as dressing up and acting, which is a different thing. But so I didn't think I'd enjoy it so much. And I learned my first, goes at it like a script. But then I found, when I went off script a little bit, that still worked. And in fact, those end up being the best bits. And I don't write anything now. I just extemporize. I extemporize every time I go on. But I think because I had no ambition, I just kept doing it. And also, on a practical sense, it earned me money in a way that acting, you have to not only pass the audition, you have to get the audition. You have to be in the room. And there's so many different processes and different people in the way. Whereas stand-up, certainly back in the day when I was starting, there were so many clubs around. If you were any good, people paid you. So when I left university and I had nothing, and the plan had been to move to London and go to drama school and do all that, I I had a few places that paid me to do gigs. So I sort of did that, and I kind of got good just by keeping doing it, if you like. And it was my principal source of income for a long time.
Sorry?
It meant I didn't have to do a day job, for too long.
Well, you've been massively successful at it. Tell me about the club in Manchester. It's a long time since I was in Manchester and able to take in what happens there. Certainly not in the last 30 years. Tell me about the Mallarkey Club.
Yeah, well, it was a surprise to me. I started doing stand up, and I was just lucky. I'd been to Manchester University. I was in Manchester. Manchester has an exceptional comedy scene, probably the best in the country. It certainly was when I started. I still think it is. And as well as being the main weekend gigs, there were little sort of above pub gigs that you do for 15 quid or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's how you learn to do the job. There's no theory really in stand up. You just have to do it. Some people have an innate talent. Some people develop theirs, but you just have to do it. I mean, again, it's one of those accidents, Peter. My brother-in-law was in an Irish band in an Irish pub called Scruffy Murphy's, and the landlord said, he'd got the quiz on the Sunday, the band night on the Friday and Saturday or whatever, and he said, I want to do comedy on Tuesday. And my brother-in-law said, oh, well, my brother-in-law's a stand-up comedian. And they went, well, let's talk to him then. And I mean, I'd been a stand-up for about a year, maybe 18 months. And I sort of said, well, this is how I do it. And they went, great. Gave me a little bit of a budget. And so I started then having to phone round the comics that I'd worked with on the circuit. And I thought I'd have 8 weeks at this place. Me emceeing, I thought, well, that'll improve my stand-up skills and my comparing skills. And the principle I had was, I just want the people who are in this room to come back next week. So that was gave me the confidence and the practicality to deal with if there was somebody disruptive. I would defeat them either with words, and if not with words, I was quite hardline. I'd go, well, look, just you're ruining it for everybody else. Here's your £1 or whatever we charged back in the day. Off you go. And 28 years later, it's still going. It's moved venues a few times, but yeah.
And I think I'm right in saying it has won the best comedy club in the North on virtually every year since you opened.
Yeah, so it's always won the Chortle Awards. Chortle is the big sort of comedy website.
Yeah.
It's very respected amongst comics. It's never made any money, Peter. I mean, somebody was saying to me last night, what did we have? Because we had a show last night. One of the comics who'd never played before said, why aren't all comedy clubs like this? Because acts like playing it, because we don't let in stag do's, we don't let in hen do's, we don't let in office parties. Now, look, I can cope with hecklers. I've played jonglers weekends for decades, but on a Tuesday night, I kind of want it. It's my gaff. So if I want TV themes in the interval, we'll play TV themes because I like them. If I don't want to have to, the comics to have to spend their first 10 minutes, calling somebody who needs attention in the front row 7 different words for arsehole or whatever, I just find that a bit tiresome. It's very different on a Friday, Saturday night, and I totally understand why some people want that of their evening and that sort of cut and thrust gladiatorial thing. But I actually like watching comics do what they've worked hard to do. Most good comics can produce gold out of a terrible gig, and it's sometimes part of the job. But I quite like it to produce the gold that they've been shining at home and they've come prepared with. And so it's a gig that acts like playing, because I used to rule it with a rod of iron. I don't really need to now because it's created its own audience, and the audience that comes tend to be audiences that like the sort of weirdos and misfits. So it is genuinely a sort of alternative club, although to be able to play it, you still have to be able to do the weekend club. So it's got it's experienced and skilled comics, but the ones that are slightly more offbeat perhaps prosper more. So it's always voted for by its peers, by the a jury of your peers who would tend to be the people who go to Chortle, who are big comedy fans or comedians themselves. And we've won a few awards, because I think we don't make any money. It's not. It costs, if you have a membership card, it costs £3 to come in, which is less than a pint.
Well, I could afford that next time I come up to Manchester.
You'd be on the door, Peter. Your name would be on the door.
I'm not. I don't go to comedy clubs. In fact, I never have done. I do enjoy comedians, and Barry Cryer was a very good friend of mine, and I used to love his simple, straightforward stand-up. It was lovely, and there are many other comics I've loved as well. Your performance The only time I've actually seen you do your act was, I think, in Germany when we were at a Doctor Who convention together. And you were stunning. I thought it was the most remarkable performance because it was so personal. You weren't intending to be a funny person. You just got up there and you told things like they were, but with a style that made people smile all the time and laugh out loud quite often. I thought it was a terrific performance. You're a brilliant comic.
Oh, well, you flatter me, Peter. Thank you. I think it's interesting that when I started, I think I wanted to be sort of Bill Hicks. I thought I had to be political and change the world. I wanted my comedy to change the world. And I always say when I talk to sort of younger comics who, I hate the fact that I've become somebody who says when I talk to young people, but there we go.
Look, we all do it. I'm talking to a young person now.
It's incredible. This is all, it's terrifying.
It's all relative.
It is, isn't it? But I think a lot of comics spend a good 6, 7, 8 years finding their voice as a comic. And then they discover to their great surprise, it's their own. Do you know what I mean? I tried to be deadpan and dour. I tried to be in your face and challenging. And I look back at some of that comedy and I think, oh, bless you, Toby. And it used to work, you could, but it actually really, really works when, I cut my cloth in some of the tougher clubs. The Frog and Bucket in Manchester is a hard club to play at the weekends, and I was doing that a lot and doing the Jongleurs clubs. And you have to be able to stand on your own 2 feet. And I found if I assumed the audience would think I was a bit of a middle class, word beginning with W.
Nothing wrong with being middle class.
Yeah, but there is probably an element of truth in that as well. I think you have to have a sense of humour about yourself. And I used to think, well, I'll cover that up. And I used to toughen my diction a little bit, and I'd have a sort of leather jacket on, and actually. But I found it was much better if I sort of went on and somebody at one of those clubs would make an assumption about me and shout at me about it. If I was already doing that, if I was already Toby who speaks like this and is a bit, and I think they might assume I might be condescending about grammar or whatever. If I actually accentuated the reality of that, it disarmed any heckle they might give me because you're you're tacitly going, but I've already done that joke and and better. So I think a lot of what I do is that I am the punchline to my joke. And when I look at a lot of comedy now, where it's essentially especially a lot of the YouTube videos going around, where currently there seems to be an appetite for saying to somebody in the front row, "What's your job?" and then telling you why it's a terrible job and being rude about your wife or whatever. I think what I do tends to be very much the punchline is always leading towards me, and I'm much more interested in what my flaws are. And I hope if I talk about my flaws, people get identification and go, okay, I don't have it, but those are mine as well. I'm much more interested in not punching up or down, but sort of punching myself in the face almost. And so that's sort of gentler perhaps and a bit more benign than maybe I started off with. But then you find your voice, I think, and the more genuine that voice is, I think, because authenticity helps you as well. This happens with politicians. Even if people don't necessarily chime with your sense of humour, I think if they see that it's not an act in a way, although it is because you're using your skills as a performer or whatever, but if they see that it comes from a genuine place, I think they're a little bit more on your side.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right.
What you want is you want people to be on your side, whether you're making them laugh or not, because then if they are inclined towards you, they are then going to be more receptive.
Indeed. Well, let's move on from comedy, because it isn't everything you do. You do so many things. You've been an actor. You started off really intending, as you've said, to be an actor. You did pretty well as an actor. You've actually, I'm a bit disappointed you haven't appeared in all the soaps, but you've been in most of them. You've been in Coronation Street playing at least 4 different characters. You've been in Emmerdale. You do them all.
I'm I'm a jobbing actor, I suppose. I mean, I'd intended to be a classical at university. I was the Shakespeare guy. If you'd asked anybody, in fact, I met up with an old friend of mine recently who's an excellent actor and a fine National Theatre actor, and we were talking about the comedy and the Doctor Who and all this stuff, and he said, but what happened with you in Shakespeare? That you were the guy. You just have to sort of go where you go. And I've never been good at the networking side of things. I've always had that night.
That makes two of us.
Well, I think we've had this conversation, haven't we, about how neither of us are really good at sort of oiling the machine. So I've always had this rather naive view. If you put yourself out, if you put the work out there and the work is good, people will give you work, and that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. But one of the things I've discovered is that actually this career is not one of momentum. There is no snowball effect. You will do a thing and it might go very well, but that doesn't necessarily lead on to the next thing. Or if it does, it doesn't until 20 years later when somebody you met on that job is doing something completely different and goes, oh, shall I ask Toby to do that? So you just have to. So my philosophy is fairly simple: is try to do a good job and don't be a prick. That's as bad as simple as it is. So acting, I think, because there are certain casting directors I've never seen. But when I and now it's all self tapes as well. You don't even get a chance to be sort of personable in the room. So I'm quite philosophical about acting, really, because I never want to become that most dreary of things, which is the bitter actor. Because I have lots of lovely friends who are lovely, interesting, fascinating people, and you find yourself in great danger of just spending all your interactions moaning about the business. And I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's wise. Also, when you sign up to it, it is an unfair business. So any idea that you're being denied something because of some great cosmic injustice is ludicrous. The actor, it's a buyer's market. They'll cast the actor they want. Now, of course, you're going to think you might be better for that, or go, well, why wasn't I in the room for that? And it might well be true. But equally, if you accept that, you've also got to accept that some of the things you've got, somebody else would have been much better at if only they had a chance. And sometimes to the outside world, what you're doing looks like you have. I had 3 telly jobs last year. Now, the fact that there were massive gaps in between them and there were various circumstances around them that made them, not as fancy as they might seem. They went out within a fairly short space of time between each other. And I had loads of mates text me going, my God, you're having a great year. And I was sitting there in my pants going, I'll never work again and nobody loves me. So it's, look, if I was given a choice, I would be doing acting, probably classical acting, but I'd like a run in a TV show as well, all day, every day. But then again, I know if I would be wondering why I wasn't doing this, why I wasn't doing that. And I know some very successful actors who are miserable as sin, and I have vowed not to be that, because when you're in it, I think you don't have a proper perspective on it. So yeah. I love it. I'm always delighted when I get some. I've had not a bad year this year, as I say, but Corrie was the closest I came. It looked like I was going to have a role, my last one, where I was going to be sort of in it, and I had a character that was booked for a short period of time, and then they brought him onto the street and he started doing more. And then that just stopped. Yes. They still mention him sometimes. I still live on Coronation Street. I'm just always round the corner, it seems.
Yes. When they mention you, do they give you a fee?
They certainly don't, but I get I usually get a text from my mum.
No, I know the feeling of that. People thinking that you're never out of work. I had a very, what would appear to be an incredibly busy time for about 20 years. But one of the series I did, which was Kickstart, which you may remember, which was motorbike trials and junior kickstarts as well. Well, I did that for 13 years. It was precisely 13 weekends. That's how long it took to do each series.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, it's not, you're not working all the time. I used to do the BBC's darts, but in fact, the World Championships, the British Championships, it was quite an extensive amount of things, but there were most of the time you weren't working on that. I don't think any actor works all the time. There are one or two. But when you appear, as you said, 3 times in a fairly short period of time, people think, my word, this is a stellar performance, stellar career. It's good fun, though, isn't it? Would you opt to do anything else? I would never. I have no regrets on that course.
No, and I think, and do stop me if I start getting a bit poncy about this. The thing I've learned, I thought, any sort of work, success in work would make me happy. That's what I thought. The appreciation of others. It's certainly the place I'm the most confident in doing it and happy. But of course, as you get older, you realize that actually, not, as I say, if I won an Oscar tomorrow, I'd be going, oh, but why didn't I get nominated for one the following year or whatever? That's in our makeup, and I think as I've gone through life, I'm pleased to have learned that actually you can box that stuff, and I think. And again, being mindful of friends of mine who are deeply unhappy about their way in life because they put everything into that all of their self-esteem comes through. And I'm talking a good game here because I do it. You go on Twitter and you want somebody to be saying nice things, but actually that the job is not the key to your happiness. That comes. It's a bit like saying about finding one's voice as a stand-up comedian. The key to contentment and happiness is much, much closer to home. We might not like it. We might think showbiz parties are what will give, and the adulation of the profession or whatever is what would give us. Because I think the tricky thing is with acting is it's like an abusive relationship. It's because you're mostly being told to F off by people.
This is true.
Even if you get the chance to approach the house, somebody will. They might let you in the lobby, and then they'll tell you to F off. But sometimes, the gates are barred, and you can't even get in. But it's a profession based on rejection, and then every now and again, it buys you a lovely dress and dolls you up and makes you feel like the most wonderful person in the world before then giving you two black eyes. It is literally an abusive relationship.
Absolutely. Colin Baker and I discussed this quite a lot, actually, and we came down to the conclusion it basically is really about luck. Luck, right place, right time. For me, it happened 3 times. For Colin, it happened 3 times, and it's probably happened for you as well. The right place, the right time, something happens, and then it stops. But I mean, that is the nature of the business. And I've always said to people, who are considering talking about, I think I'd like to be an actor or whatever, I always say, well, you must be prepared to not succeed, because that's what most of us have to go through. We all have been through it, and we've all succeeded to a certain degree, but it's not success all the time. It is a difficult profession.
It is, and I think the way to it is it's fun. I mean, I come from the countryside in the middle of nowhere, Peter. I wasn't from a showbiz family at all, and I think we were always set up to fail. Not and my partner Cheryl Lee always sort of says you always look on the pessimistic side, and she's very much about manifesting good outcomes, and she does have a point because she's been very successful. But I have to say the other side of that is, it's a miracle I even got to be an actor. Living in the middle of Shropshire, with not knowing anybody, and I'd say, I want to be an actor. My mum said, but you have to get an equity card, and we don't even know how to do that. So even actually being able to be in the profession seemed like an impossible dream.
Yes.
So I've always had to sort of scrap and as I say, produce my own work and get into that stuff. And it's always, so every sort of piece of success, if you like, has always been sort of slightly hard won and slightly miraculous. So I think by never expecting to be successful, that's always made me, I think, fight and kick and bite a little bit in order to do stuff, even if it just means producing stuff in this cupboard I'm talking to you now. I always wrote my own plays. I've written stuff I'd never intended to write, really. I don't enjoy the process of writing, but I would write stuff for me to perform, to be in. So I think because it was never expected that the likes of us would be in the profession, I never expected any success, which I think was good preparation.
I have to say, I really respect what you've been able to do, because you do write your own things, and you've written some wonderful things, and you've made work, you've achieved things because you've made it work for yourself. I'm really a two-trick pony. I wanted to be an actor, and I got somewhere with that. And I became a television presenter. And those are the things I do. I'm not a great writer. I don't have that quick turn of phrase. I couldn't stand up and do stand-up comedy to save my life. I can tell a joke, and I believe I've got quite a good sense of humour, but I am not that kind of performer, and I wouldn't even dare try. You have done all these things, and whilst we're still talking about acting, the things that you have written for yourself, you've written a couple of wonderful plays, and you did something about Spike Milligan, I think, who, of course, is a hero of mine. I'll tell you a little anecdotes about him a little later. But you have created an area where you can be successful, which I think is admirable in every way, and I envy you that facility.
Well, I mean, that's very kind of you. It's sort of born of necessity, because nothing's ever landed on my door. But I was talking to a young actress the other day when I was on it was the other day, it's probably 3 years ago, but that's time. And she's somebody that she was on a telly that I was on, and I'd seen she'd done loads of things, and she was talking about moving from one thing to the next. And I said, that's interesting. I said, I've just worked it out. The longest time I've had secure employment is 12 weeks, when I was doing Midsummer Night's Dream at the Royal Exchange in 2002, and that was a 6-week run and a 6-week rehearsal, I think.
Yes.
I've never had security beyond that.
No. So 6 weeks rehearsal, my word.
Yeah, I think so. Well, yeah.
Something else, isn't it? I've never done anything that's rehearsed for more than a week.
Well, it was a lovely job, that, and a lovely company, and it was a brilliant production. But the idea of not having any sort of form of job security at all is sort of but it means. But to be fair, I was doing that when I was at school and when I was at college. I would beaver away writing things and creating things, and I would put on plays at school. I would put on plays at university. I spent my student loan on putting on a production of Antony and Cleopatra, because I thought that the drama department would be putting on shows, and they didn't really, so I did it.
Yeah.
So I've always had that. I've always filled the void, if you like. But now that I'm still waiting. I would love somebody to just turn up and say, Toby, here are the scripts. All you have to do is turn up, do that one job, act, and go away again.
Yes.
Because it's so nice not to have your eye on everything else. That said, when I have done stuff that I've written or whatever, and the director has kindly, involved me in the production process, I do also like to have my eye on everything, because you don't want things to go wrong. So how happy I say, Peter, I would be happy. That's partially because the grass is always greener. Give me 2 weeks of just having to turn up and say my lines, and I'd be going, I'd love to write one of the scripts or direct one of them or whatever. So I think one has to be mindful of that, is that the grass is always greener. And I think because of the nature of what we do, because both of our careers have sort of been mosaics of other things.
Absolutely.
I think you get used to doing one thing and you go, perhaps I should do a bit more of the other. So maybe I'll never be satisfied, and that I just have to be okay with that, because it's that lack of satisfaction that means I've turned my hand to all the different things.
Before we leave acting, what has been your favourite acting performance? I know one of the things, a series which really was much underrated, probably because it was slightly too rude. You were in Shameless, which
yes, barely.
I thought was absolutely superb. One of the reasons I asked about that is for a short period I had, about 13 years actually, I had my own video production company, and the cameraman that I used, his assistant sometime, was one of the guys who ended up directing on that, Paul Norton Walker. I don't know if you happened to work with him.
No, I was in Shameless very briefly, and it was a female director who actually ended up directing on Doctor Who, and I had a brief moment of going, I wonder if she'll remember my performance as supermarket manager. She didn't. It was that one. That was funny because Shameless, as you know, was set in this sort of ghastly place that was supposed to be one of the worst places in Manchester. They filmed it in the supermarket what had been, until I'd moved away only a couple of years previously, my local supermarket.
Oh no!
So at least at least I've slightly gone up in the world. But Shameless was a salutary lesson, because the one direction I kept getting was that, and I'm for those that are listening, it was the director putting two fingers and sort of squeezing them together as if to say, just be a bit smaller, because you don't get taught television technique. You have to kind of learn it on the job. And I think it took me a little while, I think, to not be too, shall we say, vivid on television. So on television, I played a lovely doctor in a thing called Casualty 1907, and I had my own. I was a doctor who was a real guy called Dr. Leonard Hill, who was an expert in the bends, and I had my own big decompression chamber, and he was quite eccentric, and that was just one of those parts that I'd auditioned for different parts, and they gave me that one, and it just fitted me like a glove. So that was lovely. But I think my favorite of all time, because of the job that went with it, is that production of Midsummer Night's Dream, where I played one of the mechanicals. I was Snout the Tinker.
Oh, yeah.
But I had such a lovely bevy of. It was such a lovely cast. I'm still friends with all of the cast of that, and there were some fine actors in it, including Fenella Woolgar and Madeleine Worrell and Francis McGee. It was a lovely company. Robin Lang was brilliant, Pesky Puck. But we were allowed to kind of alight upon our own interpretations, and it was a sort of modern dress. And the mechanicals had a van. It was the Royal Exchange, which is in a circle in the round, so we could drive on and then drive off again. But I noticed that Snout is in the final scene that the mechanicals have before the play within the play. They all get together and go, "Where's Bottom?" And Bottom turns up and he goes, "I'm here, lads." And they go, "Oh, we'll go off to do the play." But I noticed that Snout didn't have any lines in that. And so I thought I invented this wheeze. I said, instead of coming in on the van, can I have a bicycle? So I came in, so I had this wheeze where I was late for every scene. So, Peter Quince goes, "Are we all met?" And then I arrive and it's like, oh, he's late. And then in the next scene, I was a bit later. And the scene where I had no lines, I wasn't in it at all. And Bottom comes and goes, "Oh, lads, we're off to do the play." And they'll go, "Hooray," and run off. And then I cycle on because I'm late. So I made a virtue of being in a scene where I didn't have any lines by actually missing the scene. And we were allowed to do all of that sort of thing. And so because I had the bike, I thought I'd play him as a biker, because they were all, one of the lads had a boiler suit on. So it was the modern interpretation of what the Rude Mechanicals would be. And I thought it'd be nice to have a ponytail, because if I was a biker. But when they I don't know if you know, to put a ponytail on, I thought I'd just get a clip. But in fact, what the wig lady did was she gave me a sort of an all-round thing that she would then gather into a bunch. But that looked like a mullet. And because I was slightly thin on top, and because my hair was back, I went, "Oh, don't put it in a ponytail. Let me have a mullet." So I was this mulleted Hell's Angel on a bicycle with slick back, receding hair. And then that gave me the voice, which was a sort of John Cooper Clarke. I did it because he's got this poem that he does, as Wall, so, "These two bricks make me wall." So I did it as the sort of John Cooper Clarke. And because it was up the road from Salford anyway, that gave it a sort of local note. And all the other mechanicals were brilliant as well. And we all let each other have our moment. And we all got on really well. And the audience loved us.
I'm sure they did.
And it was one of those jobs that I'm not romanticizing it. And actually rehearsals were difficult. We did lose a cast member who was quite poorly. So it wasn't necessarily easy, but the show, once we got on, and it was, and we had a good time outside of the show. It was just bliss. It was what I'd imagined being an actor was like. And it was a good performance. And personally, I got some really good notices from it as well, which is not bad when you're playing a relatively small part.
When I was at school, I played Peter Quince in one scene at the school speech day. It was produced by our elocution teacher, and we all had to speak so properly. I mean, the mechanicals are not like that, and I knew that, but
yeah, they are rude mechanicals. Yes.
There was Peter Quince. I was like, "Pat, well met." And I mean, it was a terrible performance. It must have been quite dreadful, but I loved it because we were acting.
Yeah,
and acting has always been fun. It's always been a pleasure for me, and I've absolutely loved it. But it's a fascinating story, and I'm sure you were absolutely brilliant. That take that you're talking about of playing one individual in a totally original way, I bet no one else has done it. It's quite superb. Very
It was
clever.
good
I'd love
fun.
to
Yeah.
have been around to see that. Let me move on. You've talked about your writing and say you don't particularly like it, but you've been quite successful at it. You've got a passion about Nigel Neal, and I know that came from a love of his play The Road.
Yeah, The Road and it was Quatermass that was my gateway drug.
I was going
really,
to come on to, yes, Quatermass, where you seem to have an absolute obsession with that. I don't mean that it's taken over everything, but when you're working on that, you've been really obsessed by it. Tell me why.
I think I don't do anything by halves, Peter. There's myriad films I've never watched. There are also loads of films I've watched 10, 20, 30, 40 times. If I like something, I tend to go back to it. And I like to do more than just watch a thing. And again, maybe this came from having too much time in the countryside in the middle of nowhere. I have brothers who'd go out and hew bivouacs and, play rugby and bird spot and all of that. And it's a shame because I do like the outdoors, but I'm not outdoorsy. And I would stay in, and I was in a house full of books, and I would read books. And then when we got a video, and I got tapes of things, and so a friend of mine gave me Quatermass in the Pit when it came out on VHS, and I'd heard of it. I knew it in relation to like more grown up science fiction and a forerunner to Doctor Who. So it was spoken of in hallowed terms, and I watched it, and I thought it was amazing. And then I watched it over and over and over again, and I got the idea, as you do as a naive 16-year-old. Oh well, nobody's written a book about Quatermass, but that's what I'll do. I'll write a book. So I wrote to loads of the actors and the people involved, and I got these lovely letters back, and the designer sent me his design sketches and all sorts of things. I was just a kid in the countryside in the middle of nowhere. But I found Quatermass fascinating. I think Nigel Neal is a really interesting writer, and that made me conversant in his work. But that was just a hobby at that time, and even I didn't sort of see that sort of writing. That would have been more. Yeah. That would have been more gathering historical information.
Can I just say, before you go on any further on that, I saw that Quatermass when it first went out.
Ah, yes.
Gripping television, of course, done live.
Yeah.
At that time, television was very, very young. The pictures were probably awful, but for me they were perfect because it was all we'd ever seen. 425 lines at their worst. Worse even than the sort of Doctor Who pictures I was in. But it was a sensational thing. And the cliffhangers, I still remember the tension that I felt at the end of the episode when the experiment's gone horribly wrong, and in the Westminster Abbey, there's this awful creature. I mean, it was sensational. And I have that. Well, I don't have a passion for it, but I remember it distinctly, so I can understand where you're coming from. But you never saw that.
No, and I never will, because that one, the experiment, they only recorded the first 2 off a flat screen, off a monitor, and when they were recording episode 2, a fly landed on the monitor, and you can still see it to this day. So they didn't even bother to record episodes 3, 4, 5, and 6. They were beamed out live, never to be seen again. No, but I mean, I've got hold of the scripts. They have the first 2 episodes. The scripts are available, and then the later 2 serials are available. And I've just done really deep dives into them. But as I say, that a bit like the Doctor Who stuff, that was kind of my hobby gone mad. The writing side of things, the more creative writing side of things, came from Shakespeare again. We did the Scottish play in the 5th year at school, and I was and again my brother had said Shakespeare's really hard. You have to speak the verse. It's really difficult. Only really good people could do it. So I thought, oh well, I'll never be able to do it. And then when we did it at school, I found I understood it. I had an aptitude for it. And again, I thought to understand it, I have to do a real deep dive. And it's an experiment I want to repeat, actually, because over my summer holidays between school and sixth form college, I read every single Shakespeare play, because you could do that when you're bored in the country. And I need to revisit that. I would love to do that again. But the Scottish play, I knew like the back of my hand, because I knew the teacher would ask us to read out bits. So if I was going to read out bits, I wanted to do it really well. So then she'd ask me to read out more, and she
Yes.
did. And me and actually my future wife Catherine, who were at school together, we ended up doing Macbeth and Lady Macbeth in Act 1 and Act 5. So I because she got us to do it at the beginning, I thought I think she might ask us to do it in the last act as well, and she did. And but so I was really prepared for Act 5, and I made it happen. And so I wrote a spoof. I wrote a thing called Macbeth: An Apology for me and my mates. And I said to the school, can I put it on and give the money to charity? And they went, okay. And everyone came to see it. And I wasn't, I was a bit of a swot, I suppose, because I was okay. I did well, I did well at school, but so I wasn't popular or anything like that particularly. But everyone came to see that, and it was funny, and it was good, and we got loads of laughs, and we raised 200 quid for charity or whatever, and it was. And doing that, and I did it all. I wrote it. I made my mates do it, sourced it, made sure it worked and was practical. And I was, there from the beginning of it to the end of it. And I played loads of parts in it, and it was great. And I realized, well, if I want to perform stuff and if I want to have good lines to say, and all that, I'll do it myself. And that was the sort of breeding. Yeah, that was the breeding that. So writing has always been a facilitation to performance, although latterly I'm quite proud that I've done a couple of things that I haven't been in, and that was a deliberate. Well, one of them was deliberate. I wrote a play called Grand Designs of the Third Kind, and I thought for this it would be interesting to write something where I know in advance I'm not writing anything for me, because I think that can sometimes skew what you're doing. And then The Road, an adaptation I did of a Nigel Neal piece, I'd wanted to be in that, and I was overruled because they wanted 2 stars in it. So I was not allowed. I was not famous enough to be in my own play.
Going back just very briefly on Macbeth, which I won't call it the Scottish play, I'm afraid. I
tried to persevere with that and gave up.
Did you ever see the Edward G. Robinson film Joe Macbeth?
Oh no, I haven't.
Way back, I think probably in the 60s. It might have been in the 50s, and of course they're all gangsters.
Yeah,
and it's done. There's the Macbeth, obviously that's nice and easy, but Banquo was banky, and it was done as a serious gangster movie. Great fun.
It's a great idea
and a clever idea, and it made the actual original play very accessible to other people. I knew it as well, and I must say it's one of Shakespeare's plays that I do like. Unlike you, I didn't read them all. I did take English and studied English at college, but I hadn't read them all. There are some plays I resisted. I can't read The Tempest. Maybe I should one day, but there are various ones I can't. But Macbeth I knew pretty well.
I have blank spots. I couldn't tell you too much about Cymbeline or The Two Gentlemen of Verona, which is why I sort of feel I should have another bash. And also, it's a long time. I used to be able to probably do Macbeth from start to finish without looking at the text.
Wow!
Again, I told you I deep dive, but and the memory is not what it was either. I used to be able to look at a thing and just be able to do it. And now, if I have an audition or something, I have to really study, and I resent that.
That would be the ultimate party piece, wouldn't it? My word. Mind, how many people would stay awake? Now, there's the thing.
That's very true. Well, it could be a good way to end the party.
Before we move off your writing, tell me about Spike Milligan.
Well, that happened again, and this is where one has to be mindful of how lucky one is in some senses when also looking at the frustrations. Because I've got mates who are proper writers who would kill to write plays for Radio 4. I kind of fell into that by mistake. We'll sort of go forwards to go backwards a little bit. This was bred from my Doctor Who show that I know we'll talk about in a bit, that I did a radio version of, and there was a script reader there who became a producer who liked my Doctor Who thing, and so would occasionally drop me a line and say, it's the commissioning round next month. Have you got any ideas? And eventually that led to me having plays on Radio 4, and everything I did got nominated either for a Sony Award or a BBC Audio Award. So I had a bit of success there. And as part of that, I came into contact with some of the other producers at BBC Radio, because also I did lots of radio acting just as a thesp, and I did a lot of radio and really loved it. Did some amazing jobs, worked with some amazing people. And then a producer I never actually worked with. I'd auditioned for Pauline a few times, and she'd always been in the building. And she grabbed me. I think I was in doing something, and she said, "What do you know about Spike Milligan?" And I said, "Well, I listen to the Goose. I know. I wouldn't say I was an expert or anything, but I know about him. I know him. I know his work." And she said, "Oh, because I want to do a thing for his centenary, which is in a couple of years." And so I sent in a couple of ideas, and she liked a couple of them, and then didn't hear from her. And I thought it was, well, that's gone. And then out of the blue, she said, "Right, we're doing this," and it's in, and I'd just been cast as Friar Lawrence in Romeo and Juliet. So typically, I had two things going on at once that needed to be done tomorrow, and it was the most agonizing process. It almost made me stop, Peter. I remember having I was at Lego World with one of my kids, and Cheryl, my partner, who sort of took over, and I had this long conversation with Pauline about the script I'd sent her. And after about 90 minutes, I came off and was none the wiser, and felt like nothing I'd done. It just felt to me like it was going absolutely nowhere. And I did what I've learned to do with writing, is that write something, even if it's bad, so that you're not going back to a blank page. And sometimes you just have to grind it out. But I remember how I felt. I remember how I smelled. I thought I was abject. I thought, this is just going to be bad. And I rang my friend Rob Ross, who's a comedy historian, who was I just talked to me about Spike Milligan, talked to me about Spike. And then I went to I had a regular gig in London every Wednesday at the 99 Club, and there's a library round the corner from there. So I thought, well, I'll just go there early, and I'm just going to look at all the, because I've been reading Spike Milligan's works. And the original idea I'd had about was him being on the gates of heaven and stuff, but it wasn't quite working, as it was a sort of almost an It's a Wonderful Life thing. And then I just looked at all these various biographies of Spike Milligan, and there was a line in one of them that said, I think Spike Milligan felt that a part of him died when he left India. He'd been in India as a kid. And my whole wheeze of my piece was about him being on the gates of heaven with St. Peter. And I think I think the ending originally was fairly basic, of going, well, it doesn't matter how hard your life is if you make it fun for other people, something like that. I was looking at how miserable Milligan was, or not miserable, but how his mental health struggles actually produced stuff that made other people happy. So it was a kind of It's a Wonderful Life thing, but it didn't feel very Milligan-y. But that line about him, he died when he left India. So I thought, well, if he's died and he's at the gates of heaven, that was just a piece of the jigsaw that for some reason, that then when I did the rewrite of this thing that wasn't working and was absolutely nowhere, and was a series of interconnected sketches that didn't seem very Milligan, seemed nothing to me, that one line just meant that when I did that rewrite, it all just fell into place. And my mum says that's the best thing I've ever written.
Wow.
And it was it was myself, Jessica Hines from Spaced, and a writer that I'd worked with up here called Lee. It was a trio of plays performed live in front of an audience, compared by John Hegley. So it was quite a big deal. It was a live night.
Yes.
And I think my play was it in the middle? It doesn't matter. And I had an ensemble cast, so I was in it as well. And so it was really nice to be asked. But that sort of came from nowhere, because, again, talking about this thing about a career having momentum, it came because of somebody that I'd vague connection with thought of me to do it. It went really well, and I haven't worked with her since. So you have this thing that all came, and it was all really successful. Everybody was very happy, and then everybody sort of disappears off in their own directions. And again, I think to the outside it might look like, but it was hard won, that one, Peter.
Yes,
it was hard one, but and it was outside my usual comfort zone as well. But I'm happy with how it turned out.
Well, Spike was a remarkable man. I mean, he must have been very difficult to work with. He never said no when people asked him to do things, so he double booked things and all sorts of stuff. I'll tell you a little interesting story. When my son was very young, I used to walk up Gloucester Road to the park, to Hyde Park, Kensington Gardens. Walked through Kensington Gardens, and at the Bayswater Road end of that, there was a children's fair, little play area, sand pits and swings and all those. And I used to take him up there. Outside it, there was an old gnarled tree. Now, I didn't realise, but it was a very special tree. And one day, walking up there, suddenly it was surrounded by hoardings, and you couldn't see the tree. It was masked, and there was a little black Mini outside parked there. I discovered later, not a great deal later, that because I saw him going in there, that it was Spike's car and he was doing something to the tree. Eventually, the boardings came down and the tree had been restored. It was a pixie and elf tree. It had pixies and fairies and little figures in it all the way. I can't remember what kind of tree it was now. And he had restored it on his own, in his own time, without any, he obviously got permission to do it, but he did it, and he recreated this tree, which is the most magical thing. What a lovely thing. You see, making people happy, what he did, making children happy with that. It was the most lovely sight to see this finished tree. I haven't been back in years, so I don't know what it's like now.
I actually think they've done a radio play about that as well. And I think that's very instructive, Peter, because Spike Milligan obviously had these huge battles and a mind that I think was probably not very easy to live with and could be very, very difficult. But I think it's always very important. And you see a lot of unhappy people in this day and age, particularly. And I think we talk more about unhappiness now more, which is more healthy. However, I do think there's a danger of talking about it so much you expect everybody out there to have the answer.
This is absolutely unforgivable of me that as a professional I haven't kept my eye on the clock.
I do go on.
But I've loved this chat. There are so many more things we could have touched on. It's only a brief look at Toby Hadoke and who he is. We could have talked for hours on any one subject.
I'm grateful, Peter.
Toby Hadoke, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, if you didn't enjoy that, then I don't know what to suggest. Plenty more good friends and guests still to come over the next months on the Peter Purves Podcast, all of which are produced by me, Peter Purves, and Mikey Smith. Till the next one, adieu.